For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
With the report on the continued violence we've seen on the news at the Tshwane University, the Western Cape, do you still consider this hashtag #FeesMustFall campaign important?
Yeah, I think that the type of news coverage that one is getting at the moment gives the impression of mindless violence. And when one gets that sort of impression, one, first of all, doesn't always get the reasons why people are resisting things. Secondly, one doesn't get total context. In one of the cases, last night I was reading the students, there was a clash, and what it appeared to be related to is they wanted to kick people out of a particular university residence, and they had nowhere to go. So that there was not a mindless violence. And I also think we need to understand that there's not one set of student protests. We're talking about a whole country. We're talking about different phases. First of all, we had the symbolic Rhodes Must Fall type of campaign, along with trying to make universities less white. I mean, if you watch on YouTube this very interesting film. It was a director's cut of 20 minutes called Roads So White. It's very clearly put about how people go into that space. And although they are admitted supposedly as equals, the whole environment is over a century old and geared to black people being there only as cleaners and things like that. So they don't feel at home. So there was that element, and then the fees must fall, and then the outsourcing. And I think what we've got to understand is that these movements have had a very different character from previous student political activities. You had SLCs, but very often the way in which the protests have been organized have been leaderless, as one person said, or the politics of the crowd, or something broad called fees must fall. And the SLCs have not been the driving force, although at Wits they do appear at most stages to have been leading it. At a place like UWC, one of the sources of contention related to the management not being willing to meet with the movement called Fees Must Fall. And the chairperson of council at one stage said he doesn't recognize this. The only recognized body is the SLC. Now, in some ways, they reached out to the SLC, but by reaching out to the SLC, they created a rift with the others. And I think sometimes you've seen a certain arrogance and in the way in which management has tried to deal with these students. In the beginning, at Wits, I remember when the Fees Must Fall started, the chair of council went to Wits, and Adam Abib was sitting there with the students on the floor and things like that. And I think he handled that very well. The chair of council said, "I've not come here to take instructions. I've come to listen, but not to take instructions." Now, why do you say such an arrogant thing? Now, that's not. When you're in a situation of conflict, you have to understand that even if the result of the interaction will be not what the other party wants, you must show them respect. You must show them the respect that you will process things properly and you don't come out with arrogant remarks like that. Now, these universities are very different in the sense that UWC was saying the other day that they were trying to work out how they could write off students' debt. Now, for UWC to write off students' debt is very different from WITS and UCT. WITS and UCT have got their own reserves. They've got their own funding. They get funding from the government. They don't have enough funding for what they need. It's true. They've had a cutback on journals, a whole lot of things. I'm not trying to suggest that they are well off. But compared with UWC, if you are a philanthropist or millionaire, you actually end up giving your money to UCT or WITS, maybe Rhodes, maybe UKZN, but definitely not to TUT, NWU, CPUT, and UWC. They don't get this money. It doesn't happen. And so that's another one of the problems which relates to it. But we've seen situations where a number of, there's a number of different forces that are impacting on what goes on. And it's very easy because there's not a structure to the movement, there's not a definite leadership, there's not definite decision making. It's easy for people to intervene, and we saw this at the union buildings where a group of students, allegedly from TUT Soshanguve campus, started to pelt the police and break the fence and burn toilets, things like that. Now, while that was happening, WITS students apparently wanted no violence. And what has been a very interesting part of these protests is people going with their hands in the air to show that they're unarmed and they come in peace. It's very important in terms of in a violent society to emphasize nonviolence. But it's easy to intervene and to disrupt, as we saw happen at the union buildings. Also, there is an uneasy relationship between alignment with the ANC, EFF and other organizations and the broad movement. And we saw this in WITS when people attacked the new SRC president, the previous SRC president, for holding what they called a secret meeting, and they claimed that they had been bribed to stop the protests and things like that. So there's a lot of factors that can make it go wrong. It's difficult to manage, and one must ask who is supposed to manage it, because it's contested who should manage it. Also, with things like outsourcing, it's a very important demand, but where you have contracts in place which only run out in 2018 or 2017, how will the poorer universities be able to buy out these contracts? Maybe UCT and WITS can make a plan, but I don't think UWC will easily be able to do it. So you've got a lot of these problems, but I think they broke the pattern where we've felt in South Africa that nothing could be achieved unless the government decided to hand it down. Now, what the Fees Must Fall campaign has done is actually forced government to make a decision that they wanted. Not equal education yet, or freedom or free education for the poor, but they did force them to say there would be no fee rise for this year. So that was very important for the morale of people.
And these protests have brought up like different controversial issues. And in your last interview, you also referred to the complexity of decolonization with regards to the curriculum as well. Now, what do you feel about the question of Afrikaans at Stellenbosch University?
Yeah, what I was indicating before is the whole decolonization curriculum change is very complicated because students can't change the curriculum on their own, and the people who are going to implement it are going to have to be the teachers who have been there implementing the colonial type curriculum. So that is a problem. Now, Stellenbosch is a university with a very, very long, well-established history as an Afrikaans-speaking, white Afrikaans-speaking university. And the demand being made, and it seems to be accepted by some sections of university authorities, that English will be the main language of instruction. Council of Stellenbosch may well reverse this. Now, what we have to ask ourselves in examining this is that a justified decision? In saying that it is justified, I believe that it is a problematic result nevertheless, because if you say that English is now the language of instruction, you are prejudicing every person whose mother language is not English, not just Afrikaans-speaking people, but Xhosa and Zulu and other speaking people, because people from other parts of the country are coming there. But the question really is, since Stellenbosch has been identified as one of the white institutions par excellence, one of the places that produced Afrikaner, white Afrikaner prime ministers, it reeked of white racism, and as in 1976 it was associated with the Afrikaner language, and for Xhosa speaking and Zulu speaking people, English is not their first language, but English is more accessible to them than Afrikaans. So that in the situation in Stellenbosch, it seems to me that it is correct to have English supplant Afrikaans as the main language, but it must go along with encouraging multilingualism, having parallel instruction where possible, to have course materials in all language if possible, to do the best to have all official notices of importance in more than one, as many languages as possible. And the proposal of Open Stellenbosch and of some 228 academics is along those lines. So I don't think it's easy, but I think it's important. On the broader question of the ideas, what has come out of this, I think we must recognize that even though we have this unfortunate violence that is happening now, and I would not want to apportion blame, I think we must recognize that from the beginning of the Rhodes Must Fall movement, we have seen an important intellectual infusion into South Africa. Revival of Steve Biko's writings and thinking, introduction into South Africa in a much bigger way of the writings of Frans Fanon, and a questioning of the ANC tradition as being hegemonic. And I think that's healthy. It's important to debate all these ideas and enrich our cultural and educational environment.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about whether the #FeesMustFall campaign turned into a chaotic mess.